Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this is Exploder, and I'm here with another episode just for you. Aren't you special? We just came off Labor Day, so I think it's appropriate that let's talk about jobs. Now, understand what I'm talking about this. I'm not talking about jobbers, and I'm not talking about that weird fascination WB had in the 90s of putting garbage men and plumbers and things like that in the ring, because if you had a job, you were somehow a gimmick. Also, it says something about the industry, considering that even the pro wrestlers had to have part-time jobs. I'm looking at you, TL Hopper. No, in this episode, I'm talking about jobs in the bigger sense. This is something I've been meaning to look at a while ago, and I've thought about it, and I finally did the research, and I remember some of these, but there were some details, quite frankly, I didn't know. In this episode, I'm talking about outside projects by the WWE and WCW. That is, other things they had in addition to the main company. So when you're talking about pro wrestling, you're talking about what goes on inside the ring, and a lot of the stuff I cover is stuff that's outside of the ring. That's not happening between the ropes and the turnbuckles and the canvas. You know how a ring works. The outside projects are things that exist simultaneously. Some things, whether they're the XFL, the WBF, or another set of initials. Bullshit! So in this episode, I'm going to look at outside projects of both the WWE and WCW. Of course, I'm going to start with a set of rules. The rules are arbitrary, and I make them up myself, but I'm going to stick to them, damn it. This is not something that is directly related to the wrestling product. So in these cases, while some of these may be used by the wrestling product, they're not magazines, they're not action figures, they're not anything that's directly related to performers in the ring. So any baseball cards, like I've covered in not baseball cards, but cards I've covered in previous episodes, action figures, which I'm going to cover in a future episode, magazines, video games, nothing like that. These are all projects outside of the ring. Something that is not covered is not necessarily, that's a key word here, not necessarily about an in-ring talent. These are simply projects that exist at the same time. And also, while I could look at some of Vince McMahon's failed projects before the WWE came to prominence, like his minor league hockey team that lasted one season, or the time he put money up to have Evel Knievel jump the Snake River Canyon in a rocket. Yeah, that's true. Look it up. I've decided I'm going to keep this strictly to the actions of the WWE and WCW during their prime. Let's start out with an oldie but a goodie, the World Bodybuilding Federation, or the WBF. The WBF was started in 1990 and was sought to compete directly against the industry leader, WEDR International Federation of Bodybuilding, or the IFBB. It was supposed to start out, supposedly, just as a magazine called Bodybuilding Lifestyle. This got them into the IFBB Mr. Olympia contest, where, at that show, they announced they were going to create their own league called the World Bodybuilding Federation. So there's sort of a backdoor way to get into the industry leader to announce that, hey, by the way, we're going to compete against you. Within months, Vince McMahon was doing what Vince McMahon does and offered top IFBB stars big money to join the WBF, which many of them did. Now, going into it, the WBF promised it was going to be a straightforward bodybuilding promotion, not with the flash and the style of the WWF, because that wouldn't work for bodybuilding. And he was right there in that it would not work. But then again, remember, this is the WWF run by Vince McMahon, who has a painting of himself in his own palatial mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. So we're really not much for subtlety in this realm. Of course, when they finally debuted the show Body Stars, everyone had a nickname, they had larger-than-life personalities. It was dripping with the personality and the glitz and the glamour of the WWF. The one thing he said he wouldn't do, because he's a showman and a bit of a liar. It included celebrities like Regis Philbin and a certain orange-faced president. It was in Atlantic City, because, of course, nothing's as class like Atlantic City. And despite everything they did, it didn't stop the 1991 WBF Championship event from losing money. The next WBF event wouldn't be held for another year, despite the presence of WBF body stars on weekly television, hyping the league as to this is going to be the next thing, and there was a weekly show called WBF Body Stars, but they weren't going anywhere. The biggest thing was there was no pay-per-view. The first one was a pay-per-view, and then they took a year off, just did TV. It's like if a wrestling show was doing Monday Night Raw every single week, building to a pay-per-view that's not coming. Or it might be a year from now. We don't know. Prior to the 1992 championship, Vince McMahon tried to drum up interest by signing Lou Ferrigno and Lex Luger. The contract terms with Lou Ferrigno went out. They just didn't happen. They couldn't agree to terms, and Luger, who was signed to the WWF but couldn't wrestle because of a contract situation with the NWA, was signed, and that was the famous WrestleMania interview where Bobby Heenan fawned over Lex Luger coming to the WBF. The biggest problem was Lex Luger got injured before the 1992 championships. So not only he was signed to the WBF and would eventually wrestle, he was signed to the WBF sort of give them a shot in the arm, and he couldn't even show up to that because he was injured from a motorcycle accident. So it's just one thing after the other. The second WBF show was the first to be broadcast on pay-per-view, and surprising no one, a pay-per-view to watch a second-rate bodybuilding competition that hasn't been on a major show in a year didn't do as well as they had hoped. This, of course, coincided with the IcoPro supplement, which somehow outlasted the WBF.
Out of the WBF superstars, the leaders in flow-free professional bodybuilding gain mass,
IcoPro,
symmetry,
IcoPro,
definition.
IcoPro.
Not just supplementation, but an integrated conditioning program scientifically designed with advanced technology to give you the edge in building your body. The IcoPro Professional Bodybuilding Program.
You gotta want it.
IcoPro. To order, call 1-800-621-2211.
At the end of this, the WBF was closed, and it was a total loss from Vince McMahon of $15 million. We're starting with something that lost $15 million. I don't know what to tell you. This, of course, leads into, like I mentioned, the IcoPro. IcoPro stood for Integrated Conditioning Program. It was a line of bodybuilding supplements. They are ads on WB programming talking about IcoPro. It was supposedly some kind of like, I'm not a bodybuilder. I mean, if everyone's ever seen a picture of me, they'd know that. But I'll tell you right now, for anyone listening to audio, I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't know the ins and outs of how it works, but to me it sounded like a protein powder. It was pills and powders, how Vince McMahon put it, which if he had said it a couple years earlier, that would have meant something entirely different.
The IcoPro Professional Bodybuilding Program will help you develop the look you want. IcoPro is the integrated conditioning program that's more than just pills and powders. IcoPro is a specially designed 9-week program of supplements, nutrition, and training to match your body's potential. Start your program to lean muscle mass now. Get IcoPro. You've gotta want it. Available at General Nutrition Centers.
It was a powders and pills, but it was also sold as not just that, but also an entire conditioning program. They brought a guy in who was a doctor, supposedly, and he talked about the program and how it was a 9-week program to develop lean muscle mass, diet, training, plus IcoPro supplements. Because you got to remember that part. That's how they make money.
To be the World Wrestling Federation champion, you got to want it every day. It takes an integrated approach to training, and that is what IcoPro is all about.
Now, like I said, it coincided with the launch of the WBF, but outlasted it, and the IcoPro program would exist until 1995, before the WBF at the time finally pulled the plug. Numerous ads featured on WBF programming with stars like Lex Luger, the Steiner brothers, and Bret Hart, telling people, you gotta want it. Long story short, people didn't.
Gotta want it.
Not only that, but son of Kurt Hennig and local, oh yeah, he's still there, Curtis Axel, even admitted on camera that he took IcoPro as a kid and it gave him diarrhea. That is a ringing endorsement if I ever heard one. Supposedly the brand was bought around 2000 by some other group, and they marketed some supplements, and then that company went out of business in 2007. So this is an interesting thing where a WWF project failed twice. Now the second time wasn't their fault, but I'm going to count it. I know it's early, but let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the thing that's going to make a return, and we're going to see if it's going to work this time, the XFL. The XFL, or the Extreme Football League, promised football in the offseason of the NFL. They immediately came out with guns a-blazing, as Vince McMahon tends to do, and called the NFL the No Fun League, citing their cracking down on excessive celebrations and all these different things. Again, not a football fan, but I know this is where the ads were at the time. But this is all sort of weird because they weren't competing directly with the NFL because they were on the NFL's offseason. So that doesn't make any sense to come out and go, oh, those guys. You mean the guys that you're playing after and will be done with your season by the time they start? Whatever. Vince McMahon wants a fight even when there's no one else on the other end fighting him. That's how tough he is. They promised Smash Mouth football, which either meant they were of a harder hitting style or All-Star would be playing during every game. Guess which one it was? First game aired on Saturday, February 3rd, 2001, and I will confess a little bit here. I watched it. I am not a football fan by any means, but I am a huge wrestling fan. I was even a bigger wrestling fan back then, and I am ashamed to say I marked out for the game. Again, not a football guy, but I think that my WWF love at the time sort of clouded my judgment. I was 16 at the time, so, is what it is. The XFL's first injury infamously happened at the opening scramble. Now, at the time, the XFL did something. Instead of a kickoff, they did a scramble where one player from each team would run to a certain line, grab the ball, and whoever got the ball, their team would get the ball on the first drive, right? In the first game with Orlando, the Orlando Rage, free safety Hassan Shamsi Dean suffered a separated shoulder before the Rage won the season opener 33-29 over the Chicago Enforcers. That separated shoulder would put him out the entire season. So he gets signed to the XFL, does one scramble, and never plays again. Hall of Famer.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have sustained our first injury of the night on the scramble for the Ball King as the Orlando player was trying to possess the ball. It looked like his shoulder got caught underneath him, and he may have a separated shoulder there. Well, I don't think I've ever seen anybody get injured during a coin toss. This is what makes the XFL different right off the bat.
They promised other things that were going to be different and fun about football. They were talking about having gimmicky things like, we're going to have raunchier cheerleaders, which basically meant they went to the local strip club and looked for anyone that was slightly too trashy for the Godfather and went, you'll do. They promised they were going to go into the cheerleaders' locker rooms, which of course is not going to happen because they were on NBC. So there's only so much you can do in a PG-13 environment, Vince.
Some have called it an unprecedented television event. Others have called it a desperate ploy to increase sagging ratings. In any event, XFL founder, chairman, and noted raconteur, Vince McMahon has ordered a camera into the locker room of the Orlando Rage cheerleaders at halftime to capture the essence of whatever it is they do. Bev, how do you feel about a camera being in your locker room?
I think it's great. They bring the cameras in the players' locker rooms. It's time they brought them into the cheerleaders' locker rooms. We get in there, we just get comfortable, and we want to take off them. Don't tell them about that.
And for some reason, they decided they were going to be a little different and allow people to have nicknames on their jerseys. That's where he ended up with Rod Smart, who was a running back who played on the first nationally televised game. And on the back of his jersey, it said the phrase, "He hate me." When asked at the sidelines, who is he simply repeated, "He hate me," because that's all you needed to do back then. Have a nickname and then just repeat it over and over again. Hey, we're still talking about all these years later, so it worked. The ratings actually looked pretty good. They were better than the NFL Pro Bowl that would air the next day. The problem was, after the initial excitement of the game, this is new, ratings suffered a more than a 50% drop between weeks. This would continue, and the final Saturday night broadcast was, at that time, the lowest rated first-run primetime sports broadcast in United States television network history. They beat the Pro Bowl in the first week, suffered a 50% loss to the second week, and at the end had the lowest rating on network TV to that point. Holy crap. The championship game came and went. The MVP, of course, was Tommy Maddox, who would end up going on and playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who was actually a decent quarterback. NBC soon announced they would no longer broadcast the XFL. McMahon said he'd find another network to work with, and he said, hey, we still have UPN and TNN. So they had 3 networks. They lost one. That sucks, but they have 2 more. The winner of the inaugural and now only season was the LA Extreme, defeating the San Francisco Demons. Now, the total loss is sort of split here because this was a joint venture between the WWF and NBC. The total loss was $70 million. They had a initial investment of $100 million. The total loss was $70 million. This is split between the two of them. So the WWE's end, they lost $35 million, with NBC losing the other 35. The NBC cited the poor ratings, and they canceled it. And the problem was also behind the scenes, even if the season did well, which it didn't, but even if it did go well, NBC during this time had acquired the rights to the 2002 Winter Olympics. So if the XFL had come back for a second season, the NBC would not be able to offer them an entire season. They would only be able to offer them certain dates because they would have the Winter Olympics during those times. So like I said, Vince McMahon goes, hey, we still have UPN and TNN, two networks that, by the way, neither of which exist anymore. So again, what does that tell you? Vince McMahon went to UPN and said, hey, what about this? And UPN came back with their own demands. They wanted, according to the story, they wanted WWF SmackDown to be cut from 2 hours to an hour and a half as a trade-off for this. McMahon found these terms unacceptable and then announced that the XFL would close on May 10th, 2001. Now that makes sense when you think about it. As the XFL was a side project, so for him to come in and say, I'm going to do this, and they go, okay, that's fine, but you have to cut SmackDown, which is, it may have been the B show, and, you know, you can argue this or that about certain years of quality, but if SmackDown, even if it was the B show, the XFL is a whole different company. It's not wrestling. Wrestling is your bread and butter. Why would you cut why would you cut off one of your feet to give yourself a chance with something? It makes no sense. So he wasn't going to cut the SmackDown show, so it hurt him there. But again, it was a fledgling league that only lasted one season and may never, the next season, even if they limped through the second season, there was no guarantee of a third season. But they would potentially cut SmackDown to an hour and a half, which would hurt their bottom line on the wrestling side, which is something they weren't willing to do. And that was a smart decision on his part. More than a few former XFL players would go on to actual decent careers in the NFL, including league MVP Tommy Maddox, who I mentioned. Rod He Hate Me Smart would play in the NFL. There were others who would go on and play for the CFL and do pretty well for themselves after the XFL closed. And one of them, at least for a little while, will go on to wrestle for the WWE. He was a guy named Ricky Ortiz. Worked for the ECW brand. Remember him? Probably not. Anyway, he went from the XFL to the ECW brand, so lateral move. Now with the new Alpha Entertainment Company reviving the league in 2020, this is one of the few projects that has failed and is going to get a new life to see if it can work again. So I hope they do well. I'm not one of those guys that goes, I hope Vince McMahon. I don't care. I hope he does well. I hope he does like the league. I hope it gives more opportunities for players that aren't necessarily going to work in the NFL I hope it's an opportunity. I hope it's another league. It will probably, and I'm going to argue here, probably never going to be the size of the NFL. I think the closest they ever came to that was the USFL years ago, and even that was a pale comparison. But the idea that they're going to go out and try again, you got to give them credit for trying one more time. So we're going to see in 2020, we're going to see how it goes. But the 2001 version, it didn't go well, and that's why we are where we are. Another side project that's really interesting because of the time and planning that went into it, it's also something that never actually happened, is the WWF Hotel and Casino. During the height of the Attitude Era, the WWF decided they were going to build a WWF Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, themed after WWF, and was a property near Interstate 15 on the freeway across from Mandalay Bay. They bought the Debbie Reynolds Casino and actually drew up got a 3D model, some drawings and things like that. They got the Debbie Reynolds Casino and realized pretty early that the actual casino itself was outdated and beat up, and they were going to have to tear it down and build a brand new building, which was going to be a lot of cost, especially in a market that's really saturated with casinos because it's Las Vegas. The project never got past the proposal stage. It was proved too big. The building was too far off the strip, and they decided not to go beyond that 3D video. You might find it online. If I can find it, I'm going to post it. But there's a 3D video tour to roughly what it was going to look like. They had some ambitious plans for it. They planned to have a full hotel and casino, live event viewing parties, even space for live wrestling shows. And according to Bruce Pritchard, they were even going to have legends act as greeters, finally doing the impossible of giving Coco Beware another booking. The land where the hotel and casino would have stood is now Allegiant Stadium, the future home of the Las Vegas Raiders NFL team. So it's not all a loss. This, of course, was a response to the WCW Nitro Grill, which itself was in the Excalibur Hotel that lasted for a year. The WCW Nitro Grill was like Hard Rock Cafe, like Supermodel Cafe, like all of these different things. Planet Hollywood, these themed restaurants where the food was not that great, but it was expensive. But you'd be next to, say, you'd have a menu with Goldberg on it, and you'd be sitting next to a pair of Hulk Hogan's boots. Something like that. It was a theme. It only lasted for a year, but it was that expansion of, again, it was a WCW side project. Outside of the traditional ring enclosure, you had this venture. It didn't last, but it was a good try. Of course, the WWF would have another version of this with WWF New York, which opened in 2000. This was a branded restaurant in Times Square, New York City, as part of the Paramount Theater building. They would show Raw and SmackDown live on the screens. They would have pay-per-view parties that were hosted by the actual wrestlers, which is a nice touch. They would shoot segments for Sunday Night Heat and Raw there, and the actual restaurant itself appears in more than a few WWF SmackDown games, which is really cool. Again, that's a little snapshot at the time. Like many branded restaurants, the emphasis was put on the brand, the gimmick, the pageantry, and less on the food or competent management. There was a gift shop that includes all types of WWE merchandise, and from the minute you walked in, it was very clear what you were in for. This was a WWF project. This was big. This was branding. This was huge. Yeah, the food might suck, but this is going to be this was a WWF experience. The restaurant suffered attendance issues on shows that didn't have a Raw or SmackDown or pay-per-view, which, if you're not keeping track, is not now that there's a show about every day. This was Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Kind of hard for the restaurant industry when you have 3 big days and then hardly anybody else. This also doesn't help when you're paying rent in one of the highest real estate areas, highest rent places, even for New York City. Times Square, and you're doing a branded restaurant, and it doesn't help when you can say that, yeah, we do well on 3 nights a week. Not good. They renamed the restaurant The World in 2002 after the WWF got their ass kicked by some panda lovers or something. I don't know. In July of 2002, this inspired the opening of the WWF Niagara Falls in Canada, which, of course, is in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm kidding. It's in Canada. Duh. Niagara Falls. The World would close in February of 2003. The gift shop would close in April of 2003 and was a total loss of $36 million. And like many other things, it is now a Hard Rock Cafe. As another one we're going to, like I said, the inspiration for WWE Niagara Falls. This venue was announced during the WrestleMania X8 Fan Access press conference in early 2002. It opened in July of 2002 as part of the Clifton Hill Strip Mall in Niagara Falls, Canada. This was different in the fact that it was not owned by the WWF. This wasn't their own building, hotel, gift shop, whatever. It was owned by Canadian Niagara Hotels, Inc., and all the fixtures and things were licensed by the WWE. So this was their business, their shop, and WWE licensed their name to them, so that's a little different. After the World closed in 2003, WWE Niagara Falls became the only official WWE merchandise store in the world, not counting Earl Hebner's trunk. It included a drop tower called the Pile Driver that was only open between mid-May and mid-November because it's in Canada. For its opening, they had Trish Stratus, Chris Benoit, and Val Venus to sign autographs to eventually open the place in case anyone forgot they were still in Canada. The last signing they did there was in 2009 by Gail Kim, despite the fact that the place actually closed on March 31st, 2011. So they did a signing with Gail Kim in 2009 and then just didn't do nothing there for 2 more years. That's how you know they've given up on a project. It's now, I think I heard now it's a brewery. Like it changed different things and now it's a brewery, so that's probably a better option for it. Then of course there's WWE Studios. Not a lot here. I mean there's the WWE Studios is still going. A lot of these are closed. These are defunct things. WWE Studios is still going on. They've done a lot of movies. They did See No Evil, The Condemned, things like that. They've also done god-awful schlock like Knucklehead. They did the film debut of Edge in a buddy cop thing with Jamie Kennedy. Yes, it's that high quality. That was so awful, and I like Edge. I don't like Jamie Kennedy, but I like Edge, and it was just awful. God, I'm glad he got better at acting because he was not good in that. They did Inside Out with Triple H. I mean, there's so many movies over the years. They did, how many Marines? What are they up to? 6 now? One of them had Mr. Kennedy in it. That was a great investment. John Cena was in the first one. Randy Orton was in this or that. They did The Call with Halle Berry, which was really probably the best received film they ever did. They had Halle Berry in it. It wasn't a wrestling themed one. It was actually a decent movie, I guess. But yeah, WB Studios, WB Films, I think it's called WB Films now. They're doing all right. They're getting by. They've smartened up because when their first couple movies, they wanted to go direct to theaters, and that's a whole different project, and that's a lot more money and exposure and things like that. And then they got smart, and they're like, oh, we'll just partner with people and put out DVDs. And that was way better because I'm telling you right now, if 12 Rounds 2 came to theaters for more than like a day, I'm pretty sure someone would burn the place down. So yeah, there's not much else to say about WB Films. It exists. I don't know if they're making money or losing money. They're probably losing a little bit of money, but hey, they're keeping it open, so it must be doing okay. Now, here's one I was always interested in. This is one, again, this is a side project, but it's not something that they own. Sometimes they'll partner with other organizations, and that's where it gets interesting. On July 11th, 2012, WB invested $5 million in Tout Industries, Inc., of Series B preferred stock, but they wouldn't reveal how much that percentage of the company that bought. Stephanie McMahon would be on the board of directors in Tout, because when you give $5 million to somebody, you better give them something in return. They announced a strategic partnership with Tout, which was a social networking service that allowed users to distribute and receive 15-second videos. Now, keep in mind, this was Vine. This was the time of Vine. Vine was these little short 6-second videos. Like if you're on Facebook right now and you see these crappy TikTok ads, just think of that with like a lot less music, just little 6-second clips of garbage. So at this time, Tout comes along and does 15 seconds because that's over twice as long, so it's bound to succeed, right? So basically, WB had two choices, and they chose wrong. They could have put money into Vine, or they could have put money into Tout. 6 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever. WB chose Tout, while Twitter bought Vine, because surprisingly, these 6-second videos that looped were more popular than the 15-second videos of God knows what. Around this time, like everything else WB does, WB encouraged wrestlers, announcers, and even, fans to send their own touts, which they'd play on Raw and SmackDown. But just like Excess, Livewire, and other call-in type shows, the quality of these fan touts were usually just a straight-up garbage fire. I mean, just awful. In 2003, Instagram introduced their own 15-second video option, or as Vince McMahon would probably put it, trying to put Tout out of business, because everything's about him apparently. The 2-year, $5 million deal ended in 2014, and it conveniently stopped appearing on WB programs right after that. What are the odds? Tout's still around from what I understand, but I mean, the idea that, I don't know, man. These companies are, the Vines and the Instagrams, I mean, Instagram's still around, but the video, the little looping video thing, the only thing now is this TikTok thing, which was, I think, an amalgamation of two awful companies that came together to make their own awful company, so whatever. Then, of course, there's Fan Nation. WB has always wanted to own everything. If they can't invest in it, they want to own it. That's what they do. In 2008, they opened their own social media network. Now, this is the time where everyone's on Facebook. Everyone's on Facebook, and they still are today. But this was especially time. Everyone's on Facebook. They wanted their own version of MySpace, Facebook. They wanted blogs, chat, and they wanted all this stuff. And so they created their own Fan Nation, where wrestlers would have their own profiles. And they would tell people, all the wrestlers, again, when they have a new project, they tell the wrestlers they got to do it. So the wrestlers had their own projects. And even guys like Kurt Hawkins, he talked about it later, it was just a joke. Everyone was on Facebook. Everyone was on MySpace for a while. Fan Nation was redundant, to the point where they closed it in 2011 due to, take a guess here, Facebook. Facebook grew and was becoming a bigger thing in our lives. And I mean, WB had a Facebook page and all this other stuff. So the idea of Fan Nation being its own separate site that no one went to, that there's a tumbleweed running through, it became redundant. So they closed it. Makes sense. And finally, our main topic for this whole episode is going to be Tap Out Clothing. Tap Out Clothing started in 1997 in San Bernardino, California, as a joint venture between two guys. And it was originally, for the most part, it was an MMA brand. It came around 1987, around the time where UFC at the time was still pretty underground. It was still pretty much a fight and scratch and claw. It was still where Tank Abbott was considered a star, and Paul Varlins, and a lot of these guys that really wouldn't last 5 seconds in a cage in the modern day. So they come with this, and the brand started as the MMA brand, and it was usually just the logo. It was really just a logo, maybe a design here or there. It would eventually, unfortunately, become part of this. There are some products that the only way I can explain them is they become like this icon for something they don't want to be a part of. In this case, Tap Out Clothing became like the international symbol for a dude named Mark who's going to pick a fight with you at a bar because he thinks he knows MMA. He's actually drunk and he has more kids than teeth, but he's wearing a Tap Out shirt, so he thinks he's tough. that pretty much became, it's like anybody you've ever seen with like a Monster Energy logo on their shirt and or car and or tattoo on their arm. It's like that. The brand would exist in this state for a long time, and it was bought out by Authentic Brands Group in 2010. In 2014, they decided to change the look of the brand from a MMA exclusive type brand to more of a general lifestyle brand, which is the kind of marketing you say when you just want it to be like, we want everyone to wear it. You know, a general lifestyle brand. That is marketing 101. I used to do marketing, and that is some marketing BS. In 2015, they entered a joint venture with the WWE, and WWE, of course, integrated it into their dress code and their wrestlers. So now the dress code is you can dress professional or you can wear gym clothes. But those gym clothes have to have a Tap Out brand logo on them. So you are basically forced to wear only Tap Out. It's a smart move. I mean, how long this will last, how long this venture will last. It's done well since 2015, so we're talking 4 years now. So they're doing all right. But yeah, that's another one. They don't own the company, but it's so far it's done pretty well for them. So you can't really fault them for succeeding. Now, of course, there's other things you could talk about. You could talk about both WCW and the WWF, WWE, whatever, when they had branding opportunities with NASCAR. Remember the WCW had its own car. At one point, WCW and the NWO both had their own cars. Kyle Petty drove the NWO car, and I don't remember who drove the WCW car. I remember the WCW car for a while there it was Sting, like the old Sting, and he just turned into the Crow Sting gimmick. And it was yellow, I think it was yellow and blue, and it was like the big old Sting look. And the NWO car was, of course, had the NWO on it. And Kyle, I only know Kyle Petty drove it. And I'm not a NASCAR fan, but I only know Kyle Petty drove it because he was actually made a member of the NWO. Because at one point, everyone was. And there was stuff of WCW and WWF had their own, like, I don't know if they had a racing team. Well, they had a racing team in the mid-90s with when WWE was still struggling. That's actually one of the reasons they hired Bob Holly. Bob Holly was a legitimate, and that's not a gimmick, folks. Bob Sparkplug Holly was a legitimate driver. He actually raced, and so when they brought him in, he wrestled and drove for their team. That was real. That wasn't a gimmick. That wasn't a stunt double. Bob Holly was their mulleted NASCAR guy in the ring and out. And then later, of course, they would have Steve Austin, Undertaker, the Rock branded cars and things like this. So, that integration between NASCAR and wrestling, there's always going to be a little overlap there. WCW went even further, and they introduced in 95, but with the Hulk Hogan onto the Hulk Hogan the Giant match, which, I don't know, they integrated a little bit of a working agreement with monster truck manufacturers. So the Giant had his own truck and Hulk Hogan had his own truck, to the point where when Hulk Hogan joined the NWO and became Hollywood Hogan, they built a new truck. They designed a new truck for Hollywood Hogan. There was an NWO monster truck. There was a Goldberg truck. Actually, when TNN, when they were still the Nashville network, they had a show called Monster Jam, and on Monster Jam, they had a Goldberg truck. It was driven by a guy named Tom Mintz. Again, the only reason I know that is because eventually, as I understand it, Tom Mintz bought out Goldberg, and it became Team Mintz. And because he's a really great driver, he was really well known. And there was a Medusa truck, which is actually driven by Medusa. And if I remember correctly, that was, I think, after WCW. I think that was her own thing, but she uses that name. Anyway, again, that overlap between monster trucks and wrestling, it's there. And there's other things, and there's a lot of stuff I'm not going to cover here, whether it's guest appearances or I was thinking about maybe doing something on the record label. It used to be called SmackDown Records. Now it's WWE Music Group or whatever the hell. Again, that's something that's still going on, and they've released a bunch of albums, some good, some named WWE Originals. But overall, it is what it is, and they do pretty well. But that's going to do it for this time. I think that's a good way to cover. I mean, we've done about, going on about a half hour of this, all these outside projects. I'm sure there's some I'm missing. If there's anything I'm missing, anything I didn't notice, or something that has gone way over my head for some reason, let me know. Put a comment somewhere, if you can. Like, favorite, subscribe, star, heart, Tanuki suit, whatever you do. Like this podcast, share it with your friends. I'm always trying to get new listeners. I like what I'm doing, and I like the people that listen, but a couple more couldn't hurt. So I hope everyone had a great Labor Day, and we will be doing a live Gromy Show taping in September, at Gromy's. It'll be a live Exploder, a live Hillbilly Therapy, and a live episode of The Gromy Show. If you've never heard of The Gromy Show, it's actually really interesting. And we'll be doing Exploder and all these things. I will have my good friend there, Saturn Boy, and we know each other actually through wrestling, so that's going to be an interesting one. And yeah, so that's my little plug in there at the end. So until next time, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.